are going to, and you kind of already have, completely broken the mold of what a player is.
Could LeBron be walking away from the game this offseason? The Lakers front office appears to be preparing for some significant roster moves, and one of those moves could mean showing Bronny James the door to make room for one of the brightest young talents in the league today. This could either define a new era for the franchise or go down as one of the most misguided decisions of the decade. Let's break down exactly what's happening. A roster spot hanging by a thread. Inside the Los Angeles Lakers front office right now, there are conversations happening, quiet, calculated, consequential conversations that could permanently alter the career trajectory of a 21-year-old who never asked to be at the center of any of this. That young man is Bronny James, and the reason his future is being weighed and debated behind closed doors has nothing to do with anything he did wrong on the basketball court. It has everything to do with a decision his father hasn't made yet. Because if LeBron James determines this summer that he's done, that 23 seasons at the absolute peak of professional basketball is enough, that his body has reached its limit, that the moment to step away from the game that defined his legacy has finally arrived, then Bronny doesn't just lose a teammate. He doesn't just lose the comfort of playing alongside his father. He potentially loses his place in the NBA entirely. The jersey, the locker, the seat on the team plane, all of it could disappear. Not because he failed, but because the circumstances that created his opportunity in the first place may no longer exist. And the machinery behind this situation is already moving. The conversations are already happening. The gears are already turning further than most people outside that building are aware of. What makes this especially difficult to process is that Bronny, by every honest account, has done exactly what was asked of him. He showed up, he put in the work, he improved in one of the most heavily scrutinized, most relentlessly criticized situations any young NBA player has ever been placed in, and he got better. His shooting got sharper, his defense developed, his confidence grew. He didn't complain. He didn't make excuses. He took whatever minutes he was given and made something out of them. And yet, despite all of that personal growth, his future in the league may have far less to do with what he produced on the floor and far more to do with what his father chooses to do away from it. Here's what this situation looks like when you strip away every ounce of sentimentality, every feel-good father-son highlight, every heartwarming storyline, and look strictly at the contractual reality. Bronny James is under contract with the Lakers through 2026-27, but that contract is only partially guaranteed, approximately $1.26 million out of a roughly $2.3 million salary, with full guarantee deadlines falling in late June 2026. Read that carefully because the implications are significant. The Lakers don't owe Bronny James $2.3 million for next season. They owe him $1.26 million, and only if they choose to keep him past that guarantee deadline. If the front office decides before that cutoff that they'd rather fill his roster spot with someone who gives them a better shot at winning a championship alongside Luka Doncic, the financial cost of moving on from Bronny is minimal, barely a footnote on a salary cap that operates in the tens of millions. That is the cold, unavoidable reality of Bronny's situation. His roster spot isn't protected by an ironclad, fully guaranteed contract. It's protected primarily by a family connection that may be on the verge of dissolving entirely. So where does LeBron James actually stand as we approach what may be the most consequential off-season of his legendary career? The honest answer is nobody knows. Not the front office, not the coaching staff, not the media, not even LeBron himself. After the Lakers were swept out of the second round by the Oklahoma City Thunder in 4 straight games, LeBron stood before reporters and delivered the kind of carefully measured ambiguity that only a man facing a genuinely life-changing decision is capable of. He expressed real uncertainty about returning for a 24th season, noting that his family's input would be central to whatever he ultimately decides. He didn't announce retirement, but he didn't commit to coming back either. He gave no reassuring statement, no clear signal, no green light that would allow the organization to exhale and plan with confidence. He left every door open, every outcome possible, cards face down on the table in a game he's not yet ready to show. Prediction markets, as of mid-2026, place the probability of LeBron retiring at roughly 25%. On the surface, that might seem low. 3 out of 4 outcomes still have him returning in some form, which sounds encouraging if you're hoping his continued presence keeps Bronny's spot secure. But look closer at what that 25% actually represents in real terms. It means there is a 1 in 4 chance that the most dominant basketball force of the 21st century permanently walks away from the sport, not years from now, not as some distant possibility, but this summer, before the 2026-27 season even begins. That is not a number you dismiss simply because it falls below 50%. That is the kind of probability that forces an entire organization to build contingency plans. And for Bronny James, those contingency plans could carry devastating consequences. And even if LeBron does return, with many analysts expecting him to come back in some capacity, whether on a reduced deal with the Lakers or potentially with Cleveland or Golden State for one final chapter, the franchise has already signaled its intentions with unmistakable clarity. The Lakers have made their long-term vision clear. Luka Doncic is the undisputed centerpiece of this franchise going forward, with LeBron potentially welcome back only in a reduced complementary role. The power structure inside that organization has fundamentally shifted. The gravitational center of the Lakers universe is no longer named James, it's named Doncic. And every decision that flows out of that building from this point forward, every trade conversation, every free agent target, every internal roster evaluation, including whether Bronny James stays or goes, runs directly through that new, irreversible reality. So where does all this leave the young man who was drafted largely so that the greatest player in franchise history could share an NBA floor with his own son? It leaves him standing on ground that is actively cracking beneath his feet. With contractual guaranteed deadlines arriving in late June and LeBron's retirement decision potentially not materializing until July or even August, the timing of all this couldn't be more painfully misaligned. The franchise may be forced to make a binding, definitive call on Bronny's contractual future before they even know what his father intends to do. That scheduling gap, more than any stat line or scouting report, reveals just how fragile this entire situation has become. The business of cutting ties. Let's have the conversation that the highlight packages and feel-good storylines tend to avoid, because when you set aside every trace of sentimentality and evaluate this for what it actually is, a professional sports franchise making roster decisions with championship consequences, the picture that emerges for Bronny James is far less comfortable than anyone in his corner would prefer. Multiple analysts and insiders have assessed the probability of Bronny being waived, having his role reduced to essentially nothing, or simply not being retained beyond next season, particularly if LeBron retires or signs elsewhere, somewhere between 50 and 70%. And those aren't numbers generated by someone chasing clicks. That is a sober, grounded assessment based on how NBA organizations consistently behave when the emotional justification for a roster decision disappears, and all that's left is cold basketball logic. To understand what happens next, you have to honestly examine why Bronny was drafted in the first place. He was a second-round pick out of USC, a prospect with modest college production and a scouting profile full of question marks. The overwhelming motivation behind using that pick was straightforward: keeping LeBron James satisfied. Keeping the greatest player to ever wear that uniform content enough to remain in Los Angeles, continue filling Crypto.com arena, and keep the franchise's global brand humming. That is not conspiracy. That is the widely acknowledged, generally accepted understanding of that draft night decision. Analyst John Hollinger of The Athletic has stated plainly that it is difficult to envision the Lakers retaining Bronny for the 2026-27 season without LeBron on the roster, especially given the partially guaranteed structure of his contract, which gives the front office a clean, low-cost exit. That's not a hot take from a social media account. That is a sober, grounded assessment based on how NBA organizations consistently behave when the emotional justification for a roster decision disappears and all that's left is cold basketball logic.
And when you examine what Bronny has actually produced at the NBA level, the argument for keeping him on pure competitive merit becomes a difficult one to make. This past season, he averaged roughly 2.9 points, 0.5 rebounds, and 1.2 assists per game across approximately 42 appearances, logging around 8 to 9 minutes per contest, while shooting 40.9% from the field and 38.6% from three. Those are not the numbers of a player who has seized a rotation spot through undeniable performance. Those are developmental numbers, the statistical footprint of a young man still adjusting to the speed, physicality, and relentless cognitive demands of competing against the best athletes on the planet, collecting experience in low-leverage situations and waiting for something to click. But fairness requires that both sides of this story get told. Down in the G League with the South Bay Lakers, Bronny looked like an entirely different player. He posted approximately 15.5 to 15.6 points, 3.1 rebounds, and 3.6 assists per game on highly efficient shooting, with stretches where he was flirting with 50-40-90 territory, and individual outbursts where he scored as many as 26 points in a single game. That is not the same player quietly logging 8 minutes in fourth-quarter blowouts at the NBA level. That is a young man who, when given real minutes and real responsibility, produces at a level that genuinely commands attention. The G League is not the NBA, nobody is suggesting otherwise, but it is not casual recreational basketball either. It is professional, competitive, scouted basketball populated by hungry athletes fighting every night to earn a call-up. And Bronny wasn't just surviving in that environment, he was, at times, controlling it, looking like a player who, given the opportunity and the runway, has the tools to contribute at the next level. But here is the fundamental tension that has followed Bronny James since the night his name was called on draft night, the tension that defines his entire professional existence. Performing well at the developmental level does not guarantee a reserved seat at the table when an NBA franchise is single-mindedly focused on building a championship-caliber roster with every resource it has. And the Los Angeles Lakers, at this particular crossroads in their organizational history, are not in the business of carrying developmental projects, no matter how much promise those projects occasionally flash. They need cap flexibility. They need proven contributors who can produce immediately alongside the stars they are building around. Every roster spot, every locker, every seat on that bench needs to belong to a player who makes this team measurably closer to winning a title. And releasing Bronny James is one of the simplest, least expensive, most administratively straightforward moves available to the front office to create exactly the kind of space they are actively pursuing. The exit scenarios are straightforward, uncomplicated, and remarkably easy for a front office to execute. The Lakers could waive Bronny outright, making him a free agent and potentially clearing a path for him to follow LeBron, wherever that destination turns out to be, whether Cleveland, Golden State, or somewhere nobody has anticipated yet. Or they could simply allow the guarantee deadline to pass without committing his full salary, letting him enter unrestricted free agency, where his professional future would depend entirely on whether another franchise sees enough in his still developing skill set to invest a roster spot and a paycheck in a guard who carries a legendary surname but an unproven NBA resume. Counter-arguments exist, and they deserve honest consideration rather than dismissal. The financial exposure of keeping Bronny for one more season is genuinely minimal, roughly $1.26 million on a roster that operates in the hundreds of millions. His G League trajectory is real, documented, and moving in the right direction. A standout summer league or preseason performance, the kind where he steps on the floor and removes all doubt, could meaningfully shift how the front office views him. And if LeBron returns, whether in Los Angeles or through a coordinated move that lands both Jameses on the same roster, the entire calculation shifts dramatically in Bronny's favor. These are reasonable arguments made by informed basketball minds, and they are not wrong to make them. But those arguments are swimming against an organizational current that is growing stronger and more insistent with every passing day. A current that states plainly and without apology that this franchise is building a championship contender around Luka Doncic, and every roster decision, every dollar allocated, every minute of playing time on this team must serve that singular objective. If Bronny James doesn't measurably serve that objective, then Bronny James becomes expendable. That isn't cruelty. That isn't a personal indictment of a young man who has done nothing wrong. That is simply the NBA, a league that has never, in its entire history, carved out space for sentimentality when championships are within reach. The guarantee deadlines arrive in late June. The clock is no longer metaphorical. It is counting down in real time. The impossible dream. With all of that turbulence churning inside the Los Angeles organization, LeBron's future suspended in uncertainty, Bronny's roster spot clinging to a financial technicality, and the entire franchise repositioning itself around Luka Doncic as the man who will carry the purple and gold into its next era, the basketball internet has done exactly what it always does when ambition collides with uncertainty. It has constructed from nothing but wishful thinking and collective imagination the single most spectacularly unrealistic trade scenario imaginable, and briefly convinced itself it might actually be possible. That scenario centers on one name, one player, one 7'4" force of nature, Victor Wembanyama. The fantasy practically writes itself. The Lakers need a generational, franchise-altering talent to slot alongside Doncic and transform Los Angeles into an unstoppable force. Victor Wembanyama is, by virtually unanimous consensus among scouts, coaches, executives, and anyone with functioning basketball knowledge, the most generationally gifted young player on the planet right now. So the logic, if you can call it that, goes something like this. Get Wembanyama, problem solved, championship guaranteed, parade down Figueroa Street, banner in the rafters. If only professional basketball operated inside the same universe as internet fantasy. Let's ground this conversation in reality by examining who Victor Wembanyama actually is at this moment, because the more clearly you understand his current standing, the more apparent it becomes just how disconnected from reality any trade scenario involving him is. At just 22 years old, this man, this generational anomaly, has already established himself as a perennial candidate for both MVP and Defensive Player of the Year. He just led the San Antonio Spurs to the 2026 NBA Finals, their first finals appearance since Tim Duncan's final run in 2014, while earning Western Conference Most Valuable Player honors for his dominant performances throughout that postseason. Let that fully register. This is not a prospect being discussed. This is not a developmental project with theoretical upside and a handful of promising moments. This is a 22-year-old who has already carried an entire franchise to the biggest stage in basketball and done it through a brand of two-way dominance, combining size, skill, defensive versatility, shot-making, and court vision that this league has not witnessed in decades, if ever. He is universally regarded as a top 2 to 5 player in the entire NBA, and somehow, impossibly, he's only going to get better. The ceiling on this man isn't just high, it's not even visible from where we're standing. The San Antonio Spurs understand exactly what they have. They know with complete clarity that Wembanyama is not simply a basketball player. He is a once-in-a-generation asset around which you build an entire decade of championship contention. The Spurs are expected to lock him into a 5-year, $251 million rookie max extension this offseason, with Supermax incentive escalators that could push the total value north of $300 million if he continues accumulating all-NBA selections, MVP awards, and Defensive Player of the Year honors. Let that number breathe for a moment. $250 million, potentially exceeding $300 million. That is not the behavior of an organization that has entertained, even briefly, even in a casual hallway conversation, the idea of trading this player. That is a franchise driving its flag so deeply into the ground that it would take something extraordinary to pull it back out. And San Antonio hasn't simply signed the check and hoped for the best. They have actively, aggressively rebuilt the roster around Wembanyama with the kind of talent that transforms a promising young core into a legitimate championship contender, including the acquisition of De'Aaron Fox, a move that announced clearly and without subtlety, we are not waiting, we are not rebuilding, we are competing right now. Wembanyama himself has publicly embraced the organization's direction, expressing genuine loyalty and confidence in where the franchise is headed. There is no discontent, no cryptic social media activity, no whispered trade requests leaking from the locker room. The player is committed, the franchise is committed, the relationship is locked in from every conceivable angle, and every indicator points in the same direction. Wembanyama is staying in San Antonio for a very long time. So what would it theoretically cost the Lakers to pry him away in some alternate universe where that conversation was even possible? The honest answer is more than they could realistically offer, and it would still be rejected. Experts have estimated that a legitimate trade package for Wembanyama would need to include multiple young stars or high-level veteran pieces, think Austin Reeves and Rui Hachimura caliber contributors, combined with